On a quiet morning in Los Angeles, a man with sunken eyes and rotting teeth was running for his life down the street. But he wasn't running from the police. He was running from the people. Dozens of ordinary citizens were chasing after him, holding sticks, chains, bricks, eyes not filled with fear anymore, but with fury. Who was he? Why did an entire neighborhood rise up as if it had just broken free from the grip of the devil? This story, it's not just about a killer. It's about how an entire society quietly nurtured evil until one day it could no longer look the other way. Los Angeles, one morning in August 1985. A man was standing inside a corner store in East LA, clothes filthy, hair wild, teeth black and broken, eyes sunken like decaying dreams. He was about to pay for a soda when a child tugged on his mother's sleeve, pointed at him, and whispered, "Mom, that's the man from the news, the killer." Seconds later, another person in the store recognized the face, the same one from last night's broadcast, accused of a string of brutal murders. A woman screamed. A man grabbed the phone to call the cops. And that's when Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, ran. He tore through the streets like fire was chasing him, but there was no fire, just the wrath of the people. Not the police, the people. Regular folks, bus drivers, butchers, a dad fixing his car, dropping everything, grabbing whatever they could find, pipes, fence posts, planks of wood. They ran after him. No one gave orders. No one needed a gun. The very community he had once paralyzed with fear had now become a battleground. Ramirez tried to hijack a woman's car, but her husband charged out and smashed him in the head with a metal bar. He staggered, bleeding, kept running until other men tackled him. A kick to the chest, a punch to the jaw, blood, tears, and a truth colder than anything else. The police arrived late, but the rage got there right on time. When the police finally showed up, they pulled Ramirez, bruised, shaken, terrified, out from the crowd. He said nothing. But his eyes, they no longer belonged to a predator. They were the eyes of a man who had just been swallowed whole by humanity. Maybe it was the first and only time Richard Ramirez ever truly felt fear. But why did it take 13 murders, the assault of women and children, before anyone screamed? Was enough, or maybe because no one ever heard the first crack. The moment a child's conscience shattered. In silence, before a tragedy far too big, far too early. Richard Ramirez was born in El Paso, Texas, the youngest in a poor immigrant family. But poverty wasn't the problem. The problem was who stood next to him during the years he was learning the difference between right and wrong. That person was Miguel Ramirez, Richard's cousin. A war veteran who came back from the battlefield with fractured memories and a view of the world that was no longer whole. Mike would tell stories from the war as if they were twisted adventures, what he did to his enemies, how he faced fear. None of it was meant for a child's ears, but Richard, only 12 years old, listened with awe, no questions, no doubts. He repeated every word like sacred scripture from his hero. Then one day, Richard witnessed an argument between Mike and his wife. No one in the family could have predicted what happened next. A sudden, violent act beyond control that left a scar on Richard's soul no one could ever erase. The police came, Mike was arrested, but no one asked about the child who sat there and saw everything. And maybe that was the moment Richard learned something, that pain can be quiet, and silence can be power. From then on, Richard started disappearing at night. He skipped school, wandered through graveyards, slept among tombstones, sat for hours in the dark, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. He was no longer the boy who once knew how to love. He became a disciple of emotional numbness. Some kids cry when they're scared, others scream. Richard, he just stayed silent and remembered. Evil doesn't always start with a scream. Well, sometimes. Mike Ramirez came home wearing a worn-out army uniform and eyes that no longer looked human. The people of El Paso called him the hero who returned. But his family, especially Richard, saw something else. A man who couldn't sleep unless he heard screaming in his head. Mike taught Richard how to use a switchblade. how to listen for footsteps in the dark. And then one day, he pulled from the inside of his jacket a stack of faded photographs. The kind no one should ever hold, especially not the hands of a 12-year-old boy. No one knows exactly what was in those photos, only that Mike called them his trophies. And Richard saw them as a manual. "What do you see?" Mike asked. "They're weak," Richard answered. It wasn't a game between uncle and nephew anymore. It was a secret classroom, where the teacher showed how to disable empathy. Mike didn't need to yell at Richard that compassion was useless. He just showed him photo after photo, and smiled, and Richard learned fast. Psychologists call it trauma bonding. A twisted tie between someone who's been broken and the one who taught them how to break. Mike wasn't just a cousin, he was a prophet of a darker world, and Richard his very first disciple. One time Mike half-joked, half-confessed, "It's boring here, not like war. Out there you could do anything," and no one dared ask why. That line Richard never forgot. You know what's worse than a child being hurt? It's a child believing that hurt is holy. And Richard back then started to believe that love and control could be the same thing. When Mike was arrested for killing his wife, many people sighed in relief. But no one realized the most terrifying thing was what he left behind. Not the gun, not the photos, but a boy who had learned to speak the language of evil, as if it were the only path to power. At 17, Richard Ramirez left El Paso. No goodbyes, no plan, just a pair of worn-out shoes, a few dollars in his pocket, and a mind already warped by memories. He headed to the city where the lights never sleep, Los Angeles. There, Ramirez got a job cleaning rooms at a low-budget Holiday Inn. A simple job, but for him, it was an opportunity. Not to climb up in life, but to start experimenting. At first, Ramirez would sneak into guests' rooms while they were out. He'd take wallets, grab electronics, dig through purses. Nobody noticed, nobody cared, they were strangers. And I was invisible. But then one night, he tried entering a room while people were still asleep. He didn't take anything. He just stood there, still, watching them breathe, listening to his own heartbeat. There was something twisted about that feeling, the feeling of control. And then he pushed further. One night, he crept into a woman's room, tried to pin her down while she was still half dreaming. But her screams woke the entire floor. The police were called, Ramirez was caught, and do you know what happened? The hotel just fired him, no charges, no report, no investigation. Ramirez walked away. Not as a disgraced employee, but as a failed experimenter, who now knew how to try again. A smarter, if I'm fast enough, if I'm clever enough, no one can stop me. There's an old law in criminal psychology. If you don't stop someone right when they touch the edge, you're teaching them that crossing it means nothing. From that point on, Richard stopped looking for jobs. He started drifting, settling in cheap, dirty places, where no one asked questions. No one looked him in the eye too long. And in those places, the motels along Skid Row, his darkness began to grow. His first crime was ignored, the next one wouldn't stop at theft. Los Angeles, just another ordinary day. A 9-year-old girl drops a $1 bill in the street. She walks around searching, clutching her shirt hem, eyes scanning the sidewalk. A tall, skinny man, face dull and lifeless, wearing a dirty black coat, approaches. He bends down, smiles. "I saw your dollar. It fell near the basement by the hotel. Want it back?" The girl nods. It was the only dollar her mother gave her to buy ice cream. And the man, he smiled kindly like the janitor at school. No one noticed when she followed him. No one noticed when the basement door shut. What happened in that basement? No newspaper could fully describe. And we shouldn't try. All we need to know is this: she never came back. And when the police found her body days later, there were still crude drawings on the concrete wall. Bizarre symbols, crooked lines like drawn by a child's hand. But the blood had dried. This was the first crime Richard couldn't deny. A child, a smile, a basement, and his soul from that moment on had no way back. No one was arrested immediately. No one realized it was him. Ramirez kept wandering. That night, he returned to his motel room, drank cheap soda, turned on the TV, and giggled to himself. Like he had just solved a riddle. The most terrifying thing isn't a killer. It's a killer who doesn't feel like he did anything wrong. From that point on, Richard no longer needed a reason. He didn't kill for money, not out of jealousy, not for revenge. He killed because he wanted to exist. Because for every time he was ignored, he would force the world to look at him through fear. The missing girl case faded in silence. No one connected it to his name, and he understood something all too clearly. The world is too busy to hear screams. From a small basement. After the girls, Richard didn't run. He quietly walked deeper into the dark, as if he were going home. He rented a tiny room in Skid Row, the slum of downtown Los Angeles. A size 11.5 sneaker print, only one pair sold in the LA area. Scribbled phrases in marker, "Hail Satan." And victims, old or young, male or female. All killed between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. To Richard, that was the hour of lost souls. From a criminology standpoint, this wasn't random anymore. This was a signature, a personal mark of a serial killer, not meant to hide, but to be seen. So evil could have a name, a symbol, a curse of its own. Ramirez believed he was serving an unseen force. He wasn't just murdering. He was conducting a ritual. I'm not crazy, I'm chosen. Satan talks to me every night. Well, that didn't make him less dangerous. It just gave him a reason not to stop. And Los Angeles at the time was nearly paralyzed. People bought extra locks, guard dogs, motion lights. The media named him the Night Stalker, a name that sounded like fiction. But the fear he planted was very real. Meanwhile, Richard stood in front of the mirror, grinning wide and with a knife. He carved another symbol into the motel wall. They're trembling now. That means the ritual is working. 1985. Los Angeles, the city of light and opportunity, began sleeping behind triple-locked doors. Police handed out flyers. The nightly news opened with bold headlines. The night predator strikes again. No one knew who he was. They only knew he could come at any time. To any house. Whether you were rich or poor, alone or with your children. Religion, once the backbone of this community, began to crack. Because the killer claimed to serve Satan, he wrote "Hail Satan" on the walls, drew pentagrams in blood on his victims' chests, whispered twisted prayers in blood-soaked bedrooms. A local resident recalled, "I wasn't a religious man. But that night I prayed, not because I believed in God, but because I was terrified of him." Gun stores tripled their sales in a month. Churches held midnight prayer vigils. Priests warned, when evil walks into your city, you don't just lock your doors, you lock your mind. And that's exactly when Richard felt most real. One night, he broke into a woman's house and forced her to pray. Before he struck, not to spare her, but to prove, even your God, I can't save you. This wasn't murder anymore. It was the act of someone trying to shatter faith itself, because he believed that if you could make an entire city stop believing in the divines, then you became the new divines. He didn't kill out of hate, he killed to be seen as a dark god. Police were at a standstill, communities fell into chaos, and the media gave him a name ripped straight from a horror novel, The Night Stalker. But this wasn't fiction. This was real, and fear had become part of the city's breath. August 1985. Los Angeles was like a swollen heart trapped in the chest of a city-wide panic, and finally, after weeks of despair, the police got a footprint, imprinted in blood, clear, sharp, at a crime scene, size 11.5, brand Avia, a rare type of athletic shoe with only one pair sold in the Los Angeles area at the time. It wasn't just evidence, it was a key, a breakthrough. The investigation team made a swift decision: keep it quiet. If the killer didn't know, he'd keep wearing the shoes, and they could track him down, step by step, like following blood through fresh snow. But then, San Francisco Mayor Dianne Feinstein held a press conference. With confidence in her voice, she announced, "Police have collected a unique shoe print. This may be the key clue to catching the Night Stalker." Well, the entire country heard it, and of course, so did Ramirez, that very night. He pulled the shoes from his bag, wrapped them in a coat, walked to the Golden Gate Bridge, a single toss, a splash, a smirk. The shoes, and the only clear piece of evidence, were gone. People say words can save lives, but sometimes words can kill an investigation. Police were stunned, silent, furious. But what was even more terrifying was that Ramirez now knew he wasn't just faster. He was smarter than the system. He kept killing, this time in San Francisco, then back to Los Angeles, moving like a demon with no fixed address, knowing that night belonged to him, and that humans never quite adapt to the dark, and in every place he passed through. Another ritual, another body. While the authorities were still lost in a maze of dead-end clues, Ramirez fell into the one place he always thought was invisible: the eyes of the people. August 31st, 1985. Just another morning in East Los Angeles. People bought newspapers, sipped coffee, drove their kids to school. Only difference was, that morning the Night Stalker's photo appeared on every front page. An old mugshot, gaunt face, sunken eyes, but familiar enough to send a chill down anyone's spine. And Richard was standing in a small convenience store. He had just pulled a soda from the fridge when he noticed the strange silence. A woman stepped back, a boy whispered into his mother's ear. The cashier reached for the phone. And in that moment, no one had to shout. Ramirez knew it was time to run. He bolted for the door. A man chased after him. Another blocked his path with a wooden stick. A mother grabbed her child, pulled them inside, and still pointed, screaming, "THATSHIM." Ramirez leapt over a fence, tried to steal a car. The owner, a woman, screamed in panic. Her husband ran out and smashed a metal bar straight into Richard's head. He staggered. Blood began to drip down his collar, but he kept running. The sound of footsteps behind him multiplied. Men and women with bare hands, sticks, bricks. Not cops, but potential victims who'd had enough. An older man, his hand wrapped in a dog chain, was the one who finally caught Ramirez. Others piled on: a punch, a kick, no guns. Just rage built up over so many sleepless nights. The man who terrified all of America was brought down by those who were never protected by the system. The police arrived last. Ramirez, face swollen, hair a mess, shirt soaked in blood, was dragged out from the crowd. He didn't beg. He just looked around, dazed, as if it was the first time he realized the world still had limits for evil, not imposed by law, but by people. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the courts. It comes from those who have lost all faith in justice, but still refuse to give up. September 1985. Richard Ramirez, now the most infamous name in America, was led into the courtroom. In front of him, dozens of cameras. Behind him, eyes that had once belonged to fathers, wives, daughters. And in between, a man with a cold smile, raising his hand to reveal a pentagram inked onto his palm. "Hail Satan," he shouted in court, as if the trial was his own personal mass. 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 assaults, 14 burglaries, every charge guilty. The law had won. But no one felt relief, because the trial had dragged on for nearly 3 years. And though he was sentenced to death by gas chamber, everyone knew it would be years of appeals, paperwork, and legal delays before anything happened. Meanwhile, Ramirez lived on. In prison, he received hundreds of letters from women. Some called him sexy. Others said he was just misunderstood. One of them even married him. Evil kills people, but sometimes delusion kills morality. When asked how he felt about the verdict, he simply replied, "No big deal. Death always comes with the territory." And he was right, but it wasn't death from the courts. In 2013, nearly 30 years after his arrest, Richard Ramirez died of liver cancer in prison. No execution, no grand finale, just a small news blurb: "The Night Stalker has died." No one mourned, but no one celebrated either, because the death of a monster doesn't free us from the nightmare of everything that allowed him to live so long. Ramirez died, but the system still lives on. And if we don't learn how to spot the darkness, while it's still whispering, there will be another child in another cemetery, repeating everything he once learned.